Welcome back to my studio and a new video. In this video, I'm going to show you how I make Briar Rose's blouse from the Disney classic Sleeping Beauty. And in this video, I will be featuring the Janome HD 3000. So let's get started. Alright, so the materials you're going to need to make Aurora's blouse are this Simplicity Easy to Sew pattern 2255, any collar pattern, but I'm using the Vogue 9201 pattern. A shirting material, you're going to need 1.5 yards of this. Thread that matches your material. This is a 60 weight cotton from Quilters Select, a scrap of white cotton, and then fusible interfacing. And obviously you're gonna need pins, scissors, iron, sewing machine, and any other like tailors or sewing instruments that you would typically use to sew garments. So let's just get right into how to make Aurora's blouse. I started by finding pieces 6, 3, and 1 from Simplicity pattern 2255. I previously used this pattern for a client, so I had to figure out which size I had cut and if I needed to trim it down. I cut the pattern down to a size 14, and I also cut the sleeves to be 18 inches long so that it would be 3/4 length sleeve. I also added the measurements for the band I was going to make to the bottom of the sleeve. Since my forearm is 9 inches, I plan to make a 10-inch by 3-inch band that would go at the bottom of the sleeve. I did modify the front slightly by cutting the top straight up to the collar instead of following the fancy curves. The reason for this was because I was going to cut the front piece on the fold and the back piece would end up being 2 pieces. Please note that we will be using French seams for this entire blouse, so make sure you give an extra 1/2 inch seam allowance when you cut your pieces. Now it was time to find piece 13 in our Vogue pattern for the collar. Time to cut the shirting fabric. Like I mentioned previously, I will be cutting the front piece on the fold and the back piece as 2 separate pieces. I also cut out the sleeves and the band for the sleeves. For the collar, I grabbed my scrap cotton fabric and then cut piece 13 down the center. Since I plan to have the closure in the collar for the t-shirt in the back, I added a 1/2 inch when I cut each piece out. I made sure to cut 2 of each collar piece, and then I brought the collar and sleeve band pieces over to the interfacing and cut that out as well. Before I start construction, I will note that I am completely ignoring the pattern instructions and darts in the pattern, since I am simply using the pieces to create the shape that I want for this shirt. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is adhere the interfacing to the wrong side of the collar and sleeve bands. Then I will fold the sleeve bands in half and press those. Then I press one side of the band 1/4 inch under and just set them aside. Moving on to the collar, I will pin the right sides together, leaving a 1/2 inch opening from the bottom of the collar to attach it to the shirt. Now I'm going to sew my pieces together with a 3mm straight stitch. Once my collar pieces are sewn together, I will clip the corners and flip them so the right side of the fabric is out. I will use my turning tool to help push the fabric at the points, and then I will press my pieces flat. I'm going to set my collar pieces aside for now and move on to the back panels of the shirt. Time to sew the first of many French seams for this project. I'm only going to go over this process once, otherwise this video would be like an hour long. So, to start, I marked 8 inches from the top of the back pieces for my opening to get the shirt on and off. Then, with the wrong sides together, I pinned the 2 back panels together from the bottom to this marking. Then, on a 2.5mm straight stitch, I sew the wrong sides together, ending at the marked pin. I'm going to press this seam open and then flip my piece so the right sides are together. And then I will press it again. Now I'm going to pin this piece with the right sides together. Then I'll take it over to my machine and I'm going to stitch it on a 2.5mm straight stitch. And finally, I will bring it back to my board to press it one more time. That's how to do a French seam. We will do at least 4 more of these throughout the video, so feel free to come back to this part as needed. For the opening of the shirt, I will fold over my fabric by 1/4 of an inch and then 1/4 of an inch again, and then I'm going to sew it down on each sides of the opening. Now it's time to attach the front to the back at the shoulders with French seam. Once the shoulder seams are finished, it's time to attach the collar. To start, find the center front of the blouse. Line the center front with the front of the collar. Pin 1/2 to one side and the second half to the other side. For mine, there's about an inch of collar hanging off in the back on each side, and that's okay because I'm going to use that for the closures at the end. I'm now going to sew the pieces down with a 2.5mm stitch, and then I'll fold the inside collar piece over the seam, tuck it under, and top stitch all 3 layers down. Before I sew up the sides and add the sleeves, I need to clean up the sleeve holes. So, to do that, I will be using the overcast stitch feature on the HD 3000. If you do not have an overlock or overcast feature on your sewing machine, I created this video on how to create clean seams in 4 different ways that I will link in the cards. I personally love the overcast feature because it means I don't have to set up my serger just to get a couple short pieces to be properly finished. For this project, I overcast both armholes and the top of the sleeves. Now I can sew the front and back together at the sides with a French seam. For the hem of the shirt, I quickly trim up the extra length I had on the front, and then I will do a 1/2 inch wide rolled hem by folding my fabric 1/2 of an inch up and then 1/2 of an inch up a second time and stitch it down with a 2.5mm stitch. And then I press it, because pressing makes everything prettier. The last piece to work on is the sleeve. So to start, we're going to prep our gather by adding a basting stitch at the bottom of each sleeve. For this first basting stitch, we will back stitch at the beginning and end. Then we will add a second basting stitch about 1/4 inch away from that, and that will have no back stitching, and we will keep the thread tails about 2 inches long. Now we will mark the halfway point on the sleeve and on the band. We will line those up with a pin and gather the 2 halves down evenly so that the band meets up with the sleeve sides. Now they're ready to be stitched down. Once they have been sewn, I can fold the band over this seam and top stitch it through all the layers to create a clean finish on the end of the sleeves. Once again, starting with the wrong sides together, I will French seam the sleeves together before I attach them to the blouse front and back. Now to sew the sleeve on, I will line the sleeve seam up with the side seam at the bottom, right sides together. Then I will line the top of the sleeve up with the sleeve seam, and I add a small pleat on each side of this to make sure that the sleeve piece will fit inside the sleeve hole. I pin around the edge and stitch it down with a 2.5mm stitch. Alternatively, if you don't want a pleat on each side of your top seam, you can also gather down those pieces by placing a gather stitch at the top of your sleeve and then gathering it down to fit. I've chosen to close the blouse up with a hook and eye placed on the overlapping portion of the collar. So I hand sew two eyes onto the right side of the collar and 2 hooks onto the left side of the collar, and that's how I finished the garment. All right, so I like it a lot. I have to trim that right there. The only thing that I think that I don't love about it is I made my little arm things slightly too tight. So this is as high as they go. But besides that, I really like it. I think it fits well. There's gonna be a bodice over it, so I'm not super concerned. It hooks in the back. I think it fits well. I like it. I love the texture. I also looking at this. I feel like it's something I could wear in a normal day setting. It doesn't, to me, look like a costume piece. I don't know, that could just be me. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you would like to see the other 2 parts of this costume, feel free to subscribe to my channel, and they should be coming out 1 week and then 2 weeks after this.